Since the NBA introduced the Defensive Player of the Year award in 1983, the league has followed a couple very specific trends when determining the winner of the award. For one, the voters highly favor the center position. Since the award became a thing, a center has won the race 26 out of 41 times. The other major trend is that the league highly favors great defensive players on top-tier teams. In the league's history, 30 out of the 41 winners have played on a top 4 seeded team. And what's even crazier is that each and every one of those 41 winners were on a playoff team. So as you can see, the typical formula for determining the winner is simple, which is essentially who's the best defensive center of the top seeded teams. But what if we said screw the formula and instead simply gave the award to the player who was honestly the best defensive player that season, regardless of what position he played and regardless of how his team finished? Well, if we did that, things would change up quite a bit. Today, the decade we're looking at is the 2000s, and let me know in a comment if you agree or disagree with my choices. In 2000, Alonzo Mourning won the Defensive Player of the Year, and he's keeping the award just barely ahead of Shaquille O'Neal. Mourning has been on the embarrassing end of some of the most amazing poster dunks in NBA history. But the reason for that is simple. It's because he was such a fierce rim protector who was willing to contest anything and everything. In 79 games played that regular season, Mourning averaged a whopping 3.7 blocks, which was the highest single-season average of that entire decade. Shaquille O'Neal was a solid runner-up for the award, as he averaged 3 blocks of his own. But he also did it in 5 more minutes per game, which really emphasizes just how impactful Mourning was when he was on the court. In 2001, Dikembe Mutombo was given the DPOY, but on this new list, he's losing the award to Tim Duncan. Ultimately, Mount Mutombo deserves a ton of credit for how he had an impact for both the Hawks and 76ers that season. If I'm truly being honest though, that award felt like a recognition of his team's surprising success rather than him being genuinely the most deserving candidate. On the season, the 34-year-old averaged 2.7 blocks and 0.4 steals on 75 games played. But by nearly every statistical measure, the 24-year-old Duncan was the more deserving player. Sure, Mutombo averaged a bit more blocks, but Duncan averaged more steals, he had more defensive win shares, he had a better defensive plus-minus, he had a much better defensive rating, his Spurs were the #1 ranked defense thanks mostly to his impact, and he played all 82 games that season. Honestly, of all the players who were losing the award on this list, this was one of the easier decisions. In 2002, Ben Wallace won the DPOY, and he's keeping the award well ahead of Kevin Garnett. It was at this point that the 27-year-old Big Ben firmly established himself as the best defender in the NBA, and it wasn't all that close. Even as an undersized center at 6'9", he was a terrorizing force, as his strength was matched by none, and his tenacity was present every night. On the year, he averaged 1.7 steals, which was ranked 15th in the entire league, and he averaged 3.5 blocks, which was easily first in all of the NBA. He was also ranked first in defensive win shares, first in defensive plus-minus, and first in defensive rating. Thanks to this season-long performance, he secured 116 of the 120 votes. And seriously, it should be considered a crime that he didn't become the first unanimous winner in NBA history. In 2003, Ben Wallace won the DPOY award, and he keeps the award ahead of Ron Artest, Tim Duncan, and Kevin Garnett. And it was definitely deserved, as he did pretty much everything for his Pistons on the defensive end of the floor. He led the NBA in defensive rebounds, he was second in blocks, and he led all centers in steals. He was first in defensive rating, first in defensive plus-minus, and first in defensive win shares. Again, as I mentioned when I started discussing this season, several players had a really strong defensive campaign. But in comparison to the dominant Ben Wallace at his defensive peak, the gap is quite significant. In 2004, Ron Artest won the DPOY, as he led his Pacers to the best record in the NBA. But alas, he loses the award to Ben Wallace. I always found it amazing how Ben Wallace won the award 4 times in 5 seasons. Yet the one time he didn't win the award was when his team had arguably the greatest defensive season in basketball history. 2 major aspects probably played a factor. For one, voter fatigue was almost certainly an aspect to many voters. And second, our test probably got the edge because it was basically a reward for his team being the top seed. But when you look at the statistics, the advanced stats, and the defensive rankings overall, Wallace almost always had the edge, as he averaged a higher combined total of steals and blocks. He had more defensive win shares, a better defensive plus-minus, and a better defensive rating. Add on the fact that he played 8 more games than our test, and add on that he was the driving force behind his team setting a plethora of defensive records, and yeah, it's clear that he should have won his 3rd straight, even if you don't include his impact in that postseason. In 2005, Ben Wallace won the award, and on this new list, he's actually losing the award to the tenacious Bruce Bowen. This was actually a very close race between the 2 players, as Wallace finished with 45 first-place votes, while Bowen finished with 33. From a surface level standpoint statistically, the race wasn't all that close, as Wallace averaged significantly more blocks and steals. With that being said, Big Ben's defensive production had taken a small step backwards since the previous 3 seasons. Then there was Bruce Bowen, who was actually very similar to the great Dennis Rodman in the sense that his great defense wasn't about his stats, but rather it was about his smothering on-ball defense that didn't always show up on the stat sheet, or at least on the surface level of the stat sheet. At the time, the best wing scorers in the league were Tracy McGrady, LeBron James, Vince Carter, and Kobe Bryant. In the 4 matchups against Bowen, T-Mac averaged 27.2 points on just 38.8% shooting. In LeBron's 2 matchups against Bowen, he averaged just 21.5 points on 39% shooting from the field. In 3 matchups, Vince Carter averaged 20 points on 39.2% shooting. And in 3 matchups, Kobe Bryant averaged only 20 points on an awful 33.3% from the field. This man was legitimately shutting down the best perimeter players in the game all season long, all while playing for the number 1 ranked defensive team that season. And he also played all 82 games while Wallace just played 74. For me, that is an impact worthy of taking home the award. In 2006, Ben Wallace won his 4th Defensive Player of the Year, and on my list, he's keeping it ahead of Bruce Bowen, Andrei Kirilenko, Tim Duncan, and Marcus Camby. Once again, Detroit was a top 2 team defensively, and of course, leading the charge was their 6'9" center. On the season, he averaged a whopping 1.8 steals per game, which was ranked 10th in the league overall, and that was also first among centers by quite a margin. He was doing his usual thing as a rim protector, as he averaged 2.2 blocks per game, which was 9th place overall. It was certainly a crowded race with many strong candidates for the honor, but ultimately, Wallace did the best mix of everything in order to gain the well-deserved edge. In 2007, Marcus Camby won his first and only DPOY, and he's keeping the award just slightly ahead of Tim Duncan. On one hand, the big fundamental did play 10 more games than Camby, but the big man in Denver was a shot-blocking machine for a Nuggets team that highly depended on his elite rim protection. For the 2nd straight season, he led the league in blocks per game with an impressive 3.3 per night. He also added in 1.2 steals per game, making him a reliable turnover-forcing machine. Tim Duncan did play for the better defensive team overall, and some of his advanced stats were a little better as well, but a lot of those stats are influenced by the supporting cast. Camby had to completely carry the Nuggets defensively, as their starting unit has several defensive liabilities, including Carmelo Anthony and Allen Iverson. For his tremendous effort and value, he's certainly worth the award. In 2008, Kevin Garnett won the only DPOY of his career, and as great as he was, he's losing the award to Marcus Camby. There's no question that Garnett's defensive energy and intensity helped that Celtics team be as great as they were on that end of the court, as they finished with a 67-15 record and had the best defensive rating of any team that season. But again, that was a collective effort. Meanwhile, Camby continued to be the pivotal anchor of Denver's defense. He averaged a whopping 3.6 blocks per game. On top of that, he played 79 games that regular season, compared to Garnett, who played just 71. In the 11 games that Garnett didn't play, the Celtics still remained an elite defensive team, as they went 9-2 while keeping teams under 94 points per game. The same certainly could not be said for Camby, as the team had no strong defensive presence if he wasn't in the lineup. In 2009, Dwight Howard won his first of many DPOYs, and on my list, he keeps the award ahead of LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Ron Artest. The voters didn't consider this to be a close race, and honestly, neither do I. At the young age of 23, his athleticism and impact took a tremendous leap forward from the previous year, and with his monstrous vertical leaps, it seemed as if nothing was out of his range when it came to his shot blocking. He led the league in that category as he averaged 2.9 blocks to go along with his 1 steal per game. He also led the league in total defensive rebounds and was widely viewed as the most intimidating player in the paint that year. There may be an argument for someone else, but for myself personally, this was one of the easier choices. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with the list? Is there anyone who should have won the award instead? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.